After promoting another paedophile apologist, this week, Sir Keir Starmer had the nerve to demand Jim Ratcliffe apologise for basically using the word colonised. Why should he? He's a private citizen. He's not running the country, although I'm sure he'd do a better job. His point was that there was a failure in our immigration system. This provided a very handy distraction for Keir Starmer and the promotion of a second paedophile apologist into the House of Lords. Very good, Keir, very good.
Dare he criticise us? We weren't the ones stuffing government with hypocrites and paedophile apologists. He can't build a team, Mr. Speaker. He has no plan. He can't even run his own office, let alone the country.
And right on cue, Sir Keir Starmer has another handy summit he can run away to abroad, the Munich Security Conference, to provide yet another deflection. And on what better topic than Brexit?
Now, we are not the Britain of the Brexit years anymore. That's why I devote time as Prime Minister to Britain's leadership on the world stage. And that's why I'm here today, because I am clear there is no British security without Europe, and no European security without Britain. That is the lesson of history, and is today's reality as well.
Ugh. But it doesn't leave it there. Now, a subtle dig at Nigel Farage and the Greens.
Reform have a different agenda. They're pro-Putin. We know where they stand. Imagine if they were in government in the United Kingdom. It's striking that the different ends of the spectrum share so much. Soft on Russia, weak on NATO, if not outright opposed, and determined to sacrifice the relationship we need on the altar of their ideology. The future they offer is one of division and then capitulation. The lamps would go out across Europe once again.
All of this to distract us from his record in public life, which in my view began with deception and dishonesty, when he conned party members and convinced them that he was a Corbynist, then sacked Jeremy Corbyn, somebody he called a friend. And since in office, he's raised taxes, many of which he promised not to.
I don't believe it's fair to raise taxes on working people when they're already paying this much, particularly in a cost of living crisis. So let me spell it out. We will not raise income tax. We will not raise national insurance. We will not raise VAT. That is a manifesto commitment.
He's been embroiled in scandal from the start. Freebiegate, Lord Alley, then the loss of a transport secretary after an old fraud conviction resurfaced, then an anti-corruption minister sacked for suspected corruption, a homeless minister sacked for effectively making her tenants homeless, a housing secretary sacked for dodging stamp duty, a health minister sacked for joking about the death of a pensioner, and a US ambassador sacked and a head of communications suspended for their links to paedophiles. Keir claimed that they lied to him, yet their links were public knowledge and fully documented before their appointments. How gullible, if you buy that. Now Lord MacDonald is warning about the woman that Keir is about to employ, Dame Antonia, investigated for bullying, harassment, and Downing Street are rushing to push through her appointment. Keir Starmer's record as Prime Minister is a national disgrace. How he's now back on the world stage trying to reverse Brexit under the guise of international security.
That. I ended the week much stronger than I started it, and that's a very good place to be.
Flaming cheek. But before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is mass migration destabilising the West? That's what US Secretary of State Marco Rubio told Europe's leaders at today's Munich Security Conference. Then in the next Great British Debate, I'm asking, is Trump right to revoke the climate ruling? The US president has reversed a key scientific ruling that determined that greenhouse gases posed a threat to public health. And coming up in the Pulse, could your bald patch be the thing dreaming of a past without going to Turkey. Wouldn't it be wonderful? Well, scientists think that we may finally have a cure. I'll let you know all about that. You won't want to listen. You won't want to go anywhere. It's stay here. But that's all coming up. As ever, your thoughts, your comments, gbnews.com/your say, or why not scan the QR code? Well, I'm now joined by the former editor of the Labour list, Peter Edwards. Peter, welcome to the programme. So am I being totally unfair? Because I see this as the way Keir Starmer's going on. He's at an international conference. He doesn't need to make a dig at reform the Greens. What's he doing? Why doesn't he just talk straight about what he's there for?
I think he is talking straight, and some people don't like that. All prime ministers criticise their opponents. David Cameron was sadly a master at criticising his opponents. Tony Blair did a bit of it as well. In terms of going to the Munich Security Conference, imagine he hadn't. There are many other European premiers there. Imagine Britain had been the only one not turning up at a time of such grave peril in Europe and across much of the world. I think it would be much more cause for criticism if he'd not turned up. The fact he's going along trying to build alliances, remember there's a war in Europe, is a vital thing to do. And there's so much in your monologue I disagree with. Yes, it has been a very bad 2 weeks for Labour. Of course it has.
18 months.
And it'd be daft to pretend otherwise. The appointment of Lord Mallison to Washington was a terrible mistake. But NHS waiting lists are coming down, wages are rising, the economy is growing, albeit not enough. Rushnara Ali, my friend, was a very good constituency MP. Things are changing in Britain. Yes, Keir Starmer has been at the brink, and we all accept that. But having won a massive general election majority, the parliamentary Labour Party decided they wanted to keep it. And I think it's the right thing to do, because Britain does need stability after 14 years of the Tories chopping and changing.
Well, he said that things have changed since the Brexit vote. I think what has changed, things have changed since he was voted, and I think really what he should be saying. But I'm just going to pull you up on those NHS waiting lists that you say are coming down. It has been exposed that actually what has happened is they're paying £3 million a month to NHS trusts for looking at the waiting list to find people to take them off it if perhaps they had died whilst waiting, or perhaps if they no longer needed treatment because a lot of them have gone private. Now, that's not bringing the waiting list down by doing something physical and useful. This is just going through a list that is actually out of date and paying someone to do it.
Well, I don't think anyone would argue in favour of retaining a list that's out of date. But again, all governments, including...
I'm just saying that nobody would argue with that. But don't then try and pretend that you've brought the waiting list down by anything other than simply going through the list and finding out that people shouldn't be on it. They've done nothing else exceptional, and paying for people to do that as well.
Over the last 20 years, governments of left and right have paid out of NHS funds for some patients to go and have elective operations privately. Now, one can argue for that or against it on ideological grounds, but it happened under Blair, under Cameron, under May, under Starmer. Taxpayers' money has gone to people like Nuffield and so on to when NHS doesn't have capacity to do things like hip replacements, for example. But that's just a fact of life.
No, but these weren't numbers of people who they'd put on through private placements. These were people who had come off the waiting list on their own volition and then gone on and either gone private or they died waiting. So this is not them going, oh, we'll take you off the list, we'll do it privately for you. That's not what this was about. This is about them paying NHS trusts £3 million a month to go through the list to find people who were no longer on it, not through anything they'd done. So I find that, I find them trying to claim the victory for that quite shocking.
Of all the things to criticise the government for, and Labour does warrant some criticism, it's not that. No one's
you brought it up, so I'm just going back and...
No one's in favour of keeping the deceased on NHS waiting
list. No, they're not.
That really would be the world turned upside down.
Yes, but let's not make a claim that it's because of something exceptional that you've done that's brought the list down. You haven't brought the list down. You've looked and found you've just updated the list. So that's, that's not really anything specific.
The lists are coming down. Yes. I think there's a lot going on this week in terms of Munich, but I think what you and I agree on is British voters tend to vote on domestic policy. I do think the next election, whenever that is, will be decided on NHS and the economy and immigration. I think what Keir Starmer's doing in Munich is really important, but it's probably not going to determine, and it's very important for Britain's security, but it's not going to determine his future or that of the Labour government.
Do you think him throwing in those two dead cats, so talking about bringing in Nigel Farage and saying, there'll be a war if we choose... I mean, come on, that's a bit much, isn't it? You're on the international stage talking specifically about international things that you're working with your international partners with. You don't need to bring in domestic issues or arguments or scrapes. I think it's just ridiculous that he did that, and it's clear that he's using this part of it as a distraction, which is why I chucked it in. So we'll all talk about Brexit, and we're all going to forget about the paedophile apologists that he promoted to the House of Lords. afterwards. It's just terrible.
Politics is a rough old business, and I think an international event talking about domestic politics is totally legitimate. Remember, the core of David Cameron's attack on Ed Miliband 11 years ago was about foreign affairs and Alex Salmond and so on and so on. There's nothing wrong with a Prime Minister talking about international alliances and attacking your opponents. And we know it's core to Labour's critique of reform, perhaps two things. They're a one-man band with Farage, and then Farage has praised Vladimir Putin in the past, which looks worse and worse with every passing year.
He didn't really praise him as such, is it? I mean, come on. That's not really quite true. And that was the comment that you're referring to was some 10 or how many years ago. If we go back and see some of the comments that, in fact, not even that far in the distance, we look at some of the comments that people in the Labour Party have made, I don't think we'd be, calling people, far right and things that Wes Streeting has said 10 years ago, and the things that, if we're going to go back that far and try and use that as something, I think that's a bit much, really.
Well, I haven't called anyone far right, but I'm sure, the core
White
of...
supremacists...
I haven't called anyone on that either.
Not you, I'm not talking about you. We're talking about people in politics who are at the high end of it and, calling people names. I mean, it's just absolutely, there's no point going on about what you're saying Farage said about Vladimir Putin. I think you've slightly taken it out of context anyway.
But Nana, you follow politics very, very closely. You know that is going to be at the core of Labour's attack on reform in the next couple of years. But what I'd add to that is that reform or a one-man band, still, Nigel Farage keeps retiring, keeps coming back. Every time they have new MPs, that tends to presage a falling out among themselves, and they can't vet the candidates. So that's what I'd attack reform on.
Well, your candidates were vetted, and a lot of them you've lost 12 front benchers in the last 18 months. That's pretty bad going. I don't think the Labour Party are in any place to talk about Nigel Farage and calling him a one-man band. And I think that's a little bit untrue as well. He's got Suella Braverman. She's a woman, for starters, and she's in there. You've got Robert Jenrick. You've got Sarah Pochin.
No shadow
Chancellor. Lee
Chancellor.
Anderson.
No shadow Foreign Secretary.
Youssef.
No shadow Home Secretary.
You're saying that he's a one-man band and he's on his own. He's not, actually. He's filling his cabinet with and his party with people, some with experience, but people with a similar mindset. So to say he's a one-man band, he's not doing it all by himself. And there are a lot of people wanting to be part of it, and they're at the top of the polls.
Well, it wasn't that far ago. He had a deputy called Ben Habib, who I believe he fell out with and then sacked. Nigel Farage's record on getting on with his own senior colleagues is kind of minimal to non-existent. They've got about 8 MPs now, but they still don't have a shadow chancellor. Why is that?
Well, because they are building their party. It's quite obvious. But if you're talking about deputies, Keir Starmer's deputy was done for, well, some people say avoiding, some people say evading, but she didn't pay a stamp duty. So let's be honest, let's be clear there. So who's he got? David Lammy now.
Angela Rayner's entitled to a fair process, though, and HMRC haven't given their findings yet.
Yeah, but she had to leave office as a result of it. So if you're going to pull up his deputy because he's had an argument with his deputy, I'm going to pull up Keir Starmer's deputy and say, well, he had a big argument with his deputy, a housing minister or secretary who hadn't fully paid the stamp duty by the looks of things.
Labour are a team, and you can agree with or disagree with their policies, but they have a breadth of opinion, they have a breadth of skill set, and they've got several hundred MPs. Reform are a handful. They're dominated by one person, and they're the very opposite of a broad church, because Nigel Farage doesn't like conflicting views.
Well, Keir Starmer, the Labour Party seems to be dominated by one person who manages to stop people from even having a chance at opposing him. So I don't really... the leader is the leader of a party. If you're a leader, you need to be the dominant force, don't you?
Yeah, but you tend to lead by consensus. My point is Labour is a broad church and has a breadth of opinion, from Keir Starmer to John McDonnell and everyone in between. Reform are only really about one person. And Reform have no economic policy.
They have plenty of economic policies. I've listened to many of their press conferences.
Unfunded tax cuts. Unfunded tax cuts.
Well, I don't think the Labour Party's taxes were funded. They told us that everything was funded, and it turns out when they got in office, a £22 billion supposed black hole, and they're taking money from everything and nothing's really been repaid. So I don't think that the Labour Party are any good at economics at all.
Reality is a truck juddering into reform-run councils at 100 miles an hour, and they're trying to find savings, and they find it very, very hard, especially with an enormous social care budget, and they're blaming everything on DEI, which is just not possible. Reform councils are struggling already.
Well, I suspect it's because, and I'll do a Labour tactic now, the hand that they've been dealt. They're picking up the pieces that have been left by a Labour council in most instances. There you have it. So there. Thank you very much, Peter Edwards. He's the former editor of the Labour List. Well, Lord Mandelson has previously denied any wrongdoing in relation to Jeffrey Epstein, stating, "I was never culpable or complicit in the crimes. Like everyone else, I learnt the actual truth about him after his death." He added that he had relied on assurances of his innocence that turned out later to be horrendously false. And in the case of Lord Matthew Doyle, he also said, "I want to apologise for my past association with Sean Morton. His offences were vile and I completely condemn the actions for which he was rightly convicted. At the time, he was maintaining his innocence, but I regret supporting him. My thoughts are with the victims and all those impacted by these crimes." And an investigation cleared Dame Antonia of bullying. A Cabinet Office spokesperson said, "Antonia Romeo is a highly respected permanent secretary with a 25-year record of excellent public service." On the matter of Angela Rayner's tax affairs, a spokesperson for Ms Rayner said Angela said that she would cooperate fully with HMRC and continues to do so. A running commentary is not helpful.